Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Kate Neligan. She is an equine-partnered life and business coach, healer, author, and holds a master's degree in spiritual psychology. Kate pairs her intuitive gifts with those of horses to help people awaken and transform through leadership and emotional intelligence workshops and retreats. Kate, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
You have a very interesting path. Would you consider yourself an intuitive, an empath, or do you kind of stray away from any kind of label?
I do consider myself both of those things. I do find labels interesting because we are all intuitive and we can all be empathic, but I definitely had my gifts on at an early age, shut them down for a while, and then have really been exploring them. And the New York Post called me a psychic a couple of years ago, and I freaked out because that's not a label I love having. But yeah, I definitely consider myself very much an intuitive, empathic healer and coach. And I also believe that we all have those gifts.
Really? It's funny. I spoke to someone over the weekend, and she had some experiences where she dreamt of people that had passed on. And actually, she went to go see a psychic, speaking of which, and the psychic actually told her she was a medium, and it kind of freaked her out. And I noticed when someone says you're a psychic, you're this or you're that, they're not usually pumping their fist in the air. It kind of takes them back a little bit.
I think it's from all the past lives where we were killed for our spiritual gifts, our abilities. There's like a witch wound, honestly. And so I think there's a little bit of that. And also I have mediumship abilities too. I saw ghosts a lot when I was a kid, and I can definitely connect very easily with my clients' loved ones who's passed over. And I've crossed over quite a few beings as well and can feel them. I don't see, which is probably a good thing because I would be freaked out all the time. So I'm not clairvoyant, but I'm very clairaudient, clairsentient, and have a lot of direct knowing.
So the reason why I guess you found yourself on this path is because you discovered these abilities early on when you're a kid.
Yes. And I shut them down because I was freaked out about a lot of them. But I was lucky because my mom has always been a board member at the Metaphysical Center of New Jersey. And so she was very much in the world of woo-woo. So it was around me a lot. Like as a teen, there were a group of women doing ohms, and meditations in my house. And as I was an atheist actually for a very long time because I was more on the science side, but I started to really open up and embrace a lot of the spiritual gifts in my mid-20s. But it's definitely been a journey of coming to accept and embrace them.
It seems because of your family, you had a lot of exposure to the metaphysical world. You mentioned past lives, and so you kind of get the whole reincarnation trip and everything that comes along with that.
I do. One of my favorite memories when I was a teen, I think it was even in middle school, I went to a reincarnation conference that the Metaphysical Center had put on, and I had my first tarot reading, and there was hundreds of, intuitive psychics, readers, all of that there, healers. I remember my first Reiki experience was with the Metaphysical Center as well. And Raymond Moody was there. And that's when I read his book, and I was so into the past life regression stuff. And what I found for myself in particular is that I remember a lot of my past lives in this lifetime. And I think it's really because I have this intention to work through them and clear them and heal them. And so I will have visceral memories of stuff that's happened to me in a past life. I've also had past life regressions with professionals, but I find it fascinating because it can really illuminate what we might be having issues with now. Like, why am I traumatized around this area, even though I didn't have anything happen to me in this lifetime around it?
So you discovered these sensibilities early on. You had a lot of exposure to it. And your major was spiritual psychology.
Yes.
All right. I think it's very cool, but it's not a very common thing, is it?
No. And so people sometimes are like, it sounds like Scientology. I don't understand what it is. And it really is a specific program the University of Santa Monica has had for 30 plus years. And, there's only about 400 folks that go through it every year. It's a 2-year program, and it's a deep dive, or it was. It's now changed to be more of an online format because the world has changed so much. But ultimately, it's a deep dive in the study and evolution of consciousness. The first year is really 26 communication skills, 8 different counseling strategies. You learn Gestalt, you learn bits about NLP and psychosynthesis, rational emotive therapy. So you're really diving into the understanding of consciousness, and it serves to answer 3 questions, which is who am I, why am I here, and how can I make a meaningful contribution to the planet? So you're really going through quite a bit of deep learning and healing. And prior to that, I had started my wake up into spirituality, but I still had a lot of eye rolls the first year and a lot of like, I don't need healing. I'm okay. It took me a little while to drink the Kool-Aid, you know?
The first thing I thought of was, and this came from a doctor that I interviewed a while back, was he called his brand of regression spiritual regression.
Nice.
Speaking of past life regression.
Well, my undergrad was psychology. So spiritual psychology is really the spiritual principles layer to psychology, which is that we are divine beings having a human experience. That's really the premise. And then it's how do you work within the mind and the body and the spirit for healing and for living life. I do believe that a lot of people had awareness of some past lives come up during the 2-year program for sure.
That's what I'm getting at. There's almost a hint of shamanism in that as well, isn't there?
At times it felt like that, yes. And I was not really interested in a lot of these things until I was in this community. And then I started going to a church called Agape with Michael Beckwith, and I started to really explore a lot more. But yeah, shamanism is what I would find like deep clearing that happened at a very cellular level in this program through just kind of diving deep into the psyche. And I feel like shamanism is similar in some senses.
Life questions, the existential things. Why am I here? How did I get here? What is the meaning? What can spiritual psychology teach us, or can it possibly answer those questions?
It really does. I feel like in the 2 years we were set up on such a deep level, because what a lot of like the curriculum is getting to know your intuition, right? It's getting to know your higher self. That's what I started to call my conscious rock star, which is where my coaching business came from. But ultimately it's starting to know the higher self, right? Developing a relationship, what they would call the authentic self. And with that, we are starting to understand who we are, not just as egos, right? Not just as minds, not just as bodies, but really as spirits. The professors have a book called Loyalty to Your Soul. And so that's really what it's about, is what is your soul here for? What is your soul's purpose? Not what job do you have? What do you do in the world? But really like, what are you here to experience? And their whole philosophy is that it's really about love. It's really about unconditional love and being in the authentic self.
When we talk about why are we here, what are we here for, what's the purpose, I can't help but think of past life regressions where we discover past lives, which is linked to probably why you're here today and what you're here to accomplish.
Yes. And so for me, I feel like there's the soul, which is here really to learn and grow and evolve and ascend in its own school. Like the program teaches that life is a school. So everything's learning. Everything can be our own spiritual curriculum. They talk about it as a soul line and a goal line. So the soul line is ascension, right? And the goal line is how do we bring our soul, our mind, our body into the goal line, which is physical world reality, 3D reality of what is my career? What is my calling? So there's a lot of people that may start as a lawyer and they come out and they're a coach, or they go into some healing profession. And that's what happened to me. I started as a vice president of marketing inside of a movie studio, and I left and I'm a life coach and healer. So a lot shifted in a short amount of time.
You have your own media company now. It's called Synergy TV.
Yes. And I started that during my master's program, because second year they have you do a dream project, which is something you've always wanted to do. So like some women started to dance for the first time in their life. They took dance classes, right? Belly dancing or pole dancing or whatever it was. For me, I was still so business oriented and very ego driven at the time. And I was like, I'm going to do a media company, because I was working on horror films. And I'm like, we need conscious films. We need films that will uplift the world and show a mirror of a better humanity.
What is an equine-partnered life coach? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So when I first started coaching in 2009, I was mostly doing like women's empowerment workshops, and it was just me coaching. And then I started to get back into riding after taking about 10 years off. And I loved horses growing up, and I competed in college, and I had no idea that they're energy workers and that they're healers or teachers or coaches. I had no clue. They were fun. They were my best friends. They were really loving. but I had no idea that they had what I would call higher vibrations or advanced spiritual abilities. And they ride between worlds. They're meditating a lot of their life. And there's a lot in the mirror and metaphor for people that they can learn from in a coaching environment. And it's based on the premise, how you do one thing is how you might do anything. So how you go say hello to a horse if you get rejected, what mental stories does that bring up? Do you feel rejected elsewhere in your life? And so we dive really in fast because you're in a kinesthetic learning experience, an experiential learning experience, rather than just a couch talk therapy session. So it's deep and it's pretty powerful. And my work has evolved from doing more experiences with them on the ground. We're not riding, like walking them around and that kind of thing, to actually just receiving from them and being able to have energy shifts because of being able to receive their energy and who they are in the world.
So what would a typical session look like? Can you give us an idea what that would entail?
Yeah, it's always based on someone's intention. So for instance, if they want to learn leadership, most people don't have experience with horses. So they're learning how to actually halter a horse for the first time, walk a horse around. If you can lead a 1,200-pound prey animal, they're able to exhibit trust and build relationship. And so that's something that can help people understand leadership styles. Or if we're doing what I would call more spiritual and energy work, it might look like sitting in a chair, laying on a massage table, or just sitting and meditating and breathing with a horse. And essentially the whole parasympathetic nervous system is getting activated, and people experience deep healings and also deep awareness, like their intuition is just activated in the presence of a horse. So they're 60 minutes, 90 minutes. Workshops are a couple hours.
So how does the spiritual psychology and the equine coaching work together?
They dovetail really well because in the spiritual psychology program, I use a lot of those counseling strategies with my clients as I'm the interpreter or the horse listener. Also the communication skills, so reflecting feelings or heart-centered listening, seeing the loving essence. These are all the names of different skills that USM has created. And the horses are naturally doing like seeing the loving essence and heart-centered listening because they are nonverbal, but ultimately we will actually practice developing these skills in real time with the animals. And so it's really diving into our own psyche, our own consciousness through the presence of unconditional love that the horses are holding and a coach that's trained in these skills. So it's just a really nice blend that is kind of unique actually in the equine world as well.
Is it kind of like meditating with a horse? Because I'm trying to picture what this looks like.
Yeah. So sometimes it's meditating with a horse. Sometimes it's actually breathing and becoming different energies, or becoming the energy of joy, becoming the energy of compassion, practicing these emotional intelligence skills, and then asking a horse to join up with you from the side and walk around with you without any tack. So it's really just based on partnership is created through the energy of who you're being and how the horse responds to that. Because horses are always reading us. They're essentially like biofeedback machines.
Interesting how you mentioned biofeedback. The first thing I thought of was telepathy, right?
Yes.
Which apparently to those people, since you mentioned ascension, there are those people that talk about 3D to 4D to 5D and so on, where thousands of years ago, we did live in a 5D environment where telepathy was like normal. So this kind of thing you're talking about was as normal as going to the dentist. Whereas these days people would think, how do we do that? How does that make sense? So how do you market, or in other words, if someone were to come up to you at a party, what would your elevator pitch be?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And yes, telepathy is how the animals are communicating. And so they actually help us with our own telepathic abilities so we can be more intuitive as well. And so I'll often ask people to just stand, breathe, watch a horse, and see if they get a message from the horse. And often the horse will say something like, be present, breathe more, relax. They say really direct things, but people get specific messages from horses, which is really cool because we are talking to them. And so there's that whole animal communication piece to it as well. So yes, I think all of that happens. Luckily, my background's in marketing, so I do my best, but this is still really hard because it's such a nonverbal, energetic experience that a lot of people come because they're like, I've heard this is awesome. I trust you, Kate. I want a different form of personal development. So they just come and they have no expectation, which is actually the best way for it to work, rather than like, I need to be healed or some sort of grasping. So if I was at a party, I would say something along the lines of, horses are incredible spiritual teachers because they've existed in this space of riding between the worlds of 3D and 5D because they're meditating so often. And their way of being in the world as a prey animal, even though they trust predators, really helps people to understand trust and to understand connection and partnership, because a predator and prey connecting is a deep experience that's very unique in this world we live in. So there's a lot that we can learn from horses by who they are and how they role model things to the world, especially around emotional intelligence.
It's a great explanation, and I like how you mentioned riding between the worlds of 3D and 5D.
Yes.
It almost makes me wish there was a website called Empath Daily where you could present, and people would get it right away, because just about everyone I talk to these days talks about ascension. We talk about 5D, and I always ask, well, why are you skipping over 4D? Because I don't know any better. They try to explain it, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't. But since the animal, in this case a horse, meditates a lot, they're probably a lot closer to that dimension than we are. It seems like it's kind of a no-brainer that this type of practice can help us evolve to eventually where those of us who get it can say, okay, I want to get to 5D. I want to ascend. I want to get to higher ground. How do I get there? This is a good vehicle for that, is it not?
Personally, I think it's the best vehicle besides things that I love like breath work, but ultimately, which the horses will do breath work with us too, they'll line their nose right next to you and actually help you to change your breathing. But ultimately, we have to be present when we're with a horse. They're so big and they can be dangerous, obviously. And so we have to be in our feet. We have to be centered. We can't live up here. And people naturally come into their hearts around horses because their hearts are 5 times the size of ours. And so there's a larger electromagnetic field. Scientifically, that's happening. And so we've talked about heart math and heart coherence. So people are dropping from their heads into their hearts, right? Which is a great portal into 5D. They're in their bodies more because they have to be present, which is also a great portal into 5D. And ultimately, to me, I have had more bliss experiences sitting with horses than anywhere else in my life, even on the beaches of Hawaii. I just experienced quite a bit of bliss being with them when I'm able to really surrender out of my thinking brain and be in the energy of who they are and what they carry. So I want that for people. I want people to have that bliss. I also work with goats, and they do similar stuff because they're so funny and they're so sweet and little. They make people laugh and smile nonstop, which is another great portal into 5D, is a lot of laughter and smiling, which is what they do. They just do it differently. I think animals are a huge opportunity for us to partner with to experience 5D. I really do believe that. That's why I created a program called Awakening with Equines, because I want people to awaken. We don't have to live in the suffering that much anymore.
Really good explanation on how to get to 5D. Do you think that most people want to get there, though?
That's a good question.
Do they or not? Maybe I missed it, but maybe some people roll their eyeballs and I'm thinking, doesn't everybody want to get to higher ground? Maybe they don't. I don't know.
You know, it's such a good question. I have a lot of metaphysical and spiritual friends. However, not everyone's talking about 5D yet, and not everyone understands it. And people are like, what about 4D? For me, it's one of those things where I think we need to be talking about it a little bit more, honestly. I think it's another word is a new earth, or it's returning to what we used to know. It's what some of the other planets are living in. But ultimately, I think a lot of people feel very much like they're not enough. They feel disconnected and they're tired of this old way. There's a lot of focus on the problem, and there's not as much focus on like, what's the benefit of being in 5D, right? And what's it going to take to be there? Because also a lot of us, it's that whole, I love Gay Hendricks. He talks a lot about upper limits, and a lot of us have some upper limits. Like our thermostat is set to 75. And if we push to 80, which is bliss, like we can short circuit. And so we have to build the bodies to be able to handle 5D. Same with Kundalini. That's why I spend every day in nature, and I have to build the body to handle it because my default programming is so negative, right? Like the rest of ours. So
because you grew up in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit because of New Jersey. Yeah, let's blame New Jersey.
I like how you mentioned default programming, but I can't help but think that to try to show them some of the trappings of 5D, I talked to someone not that long ago, mostly about 5D. And she told me that she was on a trip in Egypt with her metaphysical friends. They actually saw a hieroglyph in one of the caves near one of the Great Pyramids where you see these men holding what look like rods, and there's this giant rock. And there's like these little dashes, meaning it's like it's not attached to anything. And what she explained to me was back then, thousands of years ago, like before the pharaohs, that they had abilities where the pyramids were basically built with telepathy. It's not like it was described in the Bible where they used slave labor. And it was explained to her that the planning took about 2 months, but the actual building of the pyramid took like a couple days. Now, this is a prime example of what a 5D civilization was like. Do you believe it was like that back then?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I also got lucky because my mom taught Egyptian history to 6th graders for a long time. So I had Egyptian stuff all over my house for a long time growing up and
cool.
in Jersey. But yes, I do believe that's how it was. And I think even just you sharing that makes me realize again, and this is a message I'm getting daily right now, and a lot of my friends are as well, which is we don't have to work the same way we always did. It doesn't have to be so hard. We don't have to get from A to Z going through every single letter on the alphabet. We can go from A to Z through intention and through time warp energy and through faster manifestation. But ultimately, the message I get all the time in meditation right now is stop being so focused on 3D, which is kind of hard for me. I'm a double Capricorn. I'm like I'm Earth. Oh, yeah. So it's like all about goals. So I have to really remember, oh, yeah, I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And how do I use my spiritual gifts to enhance my human experience rather than how do I just try to change and control my human experience? So you sharing that about the pyramids reminds me strongly to go back into how can this get easier? How can this be faster? How can we essentially manifest without having to go do 10 million things to get the end result, right?
Right. Have you had the chance or the good fortune to go into the Akash and discover things?
You know, I love it so much. I've been told by 2 or 3 of my mentors that I have the ability to read the Akashic records. I find that when I remember past lives, I most likely am in the records, and that's what's coming forward. But it's not something I do consciously or intentionally. And I actually do a monthly reading with someone in New Jersey who does the Akashics, who's excellent. And it all goes back to New Jersey. But ultimately, yeah, I think it's really powerful. It makes sense to me that we would be connected to a muse and be able to also channel music or channel different things. I know when I'm fully surrendered, I can sing at a different level than I've ever been able to sing when I'm in a surrendered state. And music can come through my voice, which is fascinating because I don't ever think of it.
I wasn't that far off the mark then.
No, not at all.
The 5D thing is really fascinating because I think if people could have a glimpse of what was possible, how they built the pyramids, it's not the first time I've heard that. And it's not the first example of what can be accomplished. And I'm not really sure what caused the descent or not, but when we circle back to your practice and what you do with animals, it seems like horses and goats and maybe several others could be a portal for us to rediscover what we had thousands of years ago. That's what it sounds like, what you're trying to do. When you mention horses and animals, for that matter, as spiritual teachers, what's the difference between a spiritual teacher and a spirit guide?
Good question. Well, I think a spirit guide is often in spirit. For instance, I have now 14 horses that I've worked with or know or love on the other side. So I call them the heaven herd, and I feel like they're spirit guides. And often they are with me. New opportunities will come up when I pray to them, or I feel them in my sessions, and they're kind of guiding what's happening. We obviously have free will, so we have to really be willing to partner with them intentionally. And that's what I do. But the spiritual teacher, you know, it's often a present physical being. And I think of Yogananda when he was alive, or even some of the other masters when they were alive. And a lot of who they are is they care more that you're getting the ascension, that you're getting the lessons than whether you like them. There's not a lot of ego. They're really there to serve. They have an understanding of things that we have yet to fully understand, or we have to remember. More likely, we have to remember these things, but they remember them. And so they're way showers. And so they are kind of holding space for us and reminding us of who we are so that we ourselves can wake up, that we ourselves can remember and live from that space. So they're more of a physical world teacher in this time for us to actually go and be with. My old mare who passed, I used to call her Yogananda because she was fiercely loving. And if you got it, she was there with you. And if you didn't, she was out of there. It was like how Yogananda was. You get initiated. So I always say my clients are brave because sometimes they come, people will look into the eyes of a horse and they'll just start sobbing. So there's these deep emotional cleansings that are happening. And sometimes it happens when someone's opening the car door at the ranch and they're already in the energy of it. So it's really kind of beautiful. And I never know what to expect. And I always, have a lot of awe around it and a lot of wonder because you just couldn't make it up. It's one of those things sometimes you do really have to see it to understand it and to believe it because it's really just very serendipitous in many ways.
When we talk about going back to 3D to 5D and the bond between humans and animals, for the people that get it, what is the transformation that they're looking for, or do they not really know what they're looking for when they come to you?
It's a little bit of a mix. I think the biggest thing that people do come for is some sort of relationship pain, right? I have a lot of people who've gone through divorce. They're going through some form of loss or grief. They're having even frustrations in their own relationship with themselves, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, negative thinking. So they're really looking for relief from their pain, their suffering, their own mental anguish. And I've worked with donkeys too. Donkeys carry burdens, and that's a lot of what happens. These burdens get lifted very quickly. The other is career things. So people are wanting to develop better communication skills, better leadership, work with companies as well and do team building and leadership training. And so they're wanting specific trainings that the horses can help teach. So the lead mare in the wild makes the best decisions, is completely trusted by the horse herd. And so they all follow her. And so even in that dynamic as a role model, we have a lot to learn from their herd environment and how they take care of each other and how they work together. And they have a hierarchy, but there's nothing better than or less than in that hierarchy. They're equals, but they have different roles to play. So society has a lot to learn from them, in my belief. But people will come sometimes because they're frustrated with their career. They want a promotion or they want a different job and they need to be willing to make the leap. And I work a lot more with women, but a lot of them come for confidence and for calm and for connection and for clarity. Those are the big pieces that a lot of coaches coach on, but I find we get there faster with the horses present.
Do you think that the fact that you work with women more is not necessarily by design, but it's more like their intuition allows them to clue into the opportunity more so than men?
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. Yeah, I think it is sometimes an intuitive thing. I think a lot of women are kind of seekers and it's different for us to go get help. Whereas there's the whole men won't even ask for directions type thing. It's a different experience. It can be very humbling for men who come, and I have done men's groups. I have worked with corporate executives and CEOs that are men, and it's really powerful for them. They love it too. And it softens them because what the horses do is they blend strength and softness. There's really no like feminine or masculine with the horses. It's just this like energy of softness and gentleness and this energy of like strength and power. Women often need more strength and power and to be comfortable with it. So sometimes they're too soft and we work on growing their strength. And then sometimes with men, they might come in with a lot of strength and power, but they may need some softness and cultivating some gentleness. And so it's really just about blending the energies.
Whenever these type of topics come up, because it's usually about ascension and trying to elevate, trying to raise our game spiritually, mentally, and so on. I've heard a lot of people talk about moving away from the masculine energy to the feminine. Do you think moving away from the masculine to the feminine is something that's happening simultaneously, or is it very much connected with what's going on?
Yeah, so I would say that we've swung very far to the patriarchal energies. We need to swing somewhat into the feminine energies for us to balance out. But ultimately, I think we're going to come into that middle point of the integration of masculine and feminine. So we can't have it be too feminine. It's not going to work. It can't be too masculine anymore. We know that doesn't work. We have proof. It's really this integration and the balance point between both that is there. And my experience in the bliss energy is there's no masculine or feminine to it. It's just energy. And it's just this like incredible feel-good energy and heightened abilities that doesn't really have a gender attached to it. In metaphysical principles, supposedly in the future, we're going into more androgynous beings. That's hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes, but it maybe not if other planets are already like that, right? So
the other planets, that's probably a discussion for another day, but right. And when you talk about people who interviewed a being from thousands of years into the future, they don't look anything like us. So it's hard for me to get my head around that too, but I think ultimately there's a lot of things that a lot of us don't know yet about these types of beings. In order to accept this and actually be open to it, what are some simple things people need to open themselves up to or learn about?
I love that question so much. I've never been asked that. I will say mindfulness, which is becoming popular. Like yoga is now popular. Yoga is about union and strength. So are the horses. Mindfulness, which is about calm and stress reduction, which we all need, can be applied to the horses. The simplicity of just, we need to grow our emotional intelligence skills so we communicate better, especially now that we're in such a hyper-connected digital world, that we need to still have these deep emotional intelligence skills. And I'll get kids sometimes that are overwhelmed. I think people need to also understand that education now can happen in different places and environments, like outside in nature. We saw homeschooling over the last year for the first time at a wide scale. People realize there's different ways to educate now. There's different ways to learn. We all had to return to nature because we were kind of forced to be in a place where that felt safer. So there's a lot, I think, of just being open to some of these simple beliefs. It's not new age or metaphysical. It's just, can your body relax more? Do you want that? Can we look at the science of heart math and parasympathetic and vagal nerve, and like, can we understand what's actually happening to us when we slow down, when we're in nature and when we're around animals? Habry, which is a research institute for the human animal bond, shows the emotional, mental, physical wellness that happens, that they've done studies on when we're around animals, when we touch animals. It's really pretty basic. Understanding that horses are energy workers is maybe a bit more of an advanced concept that I yet to have a ton of research to prove. I just have experiential evidence. Some of these other stuff, it's basic psychology that we're looking at.
I like the term heart math. Does that have anything to do with emotional intelligence? And with your emotional intelligence workshops, how are they different from a leadership workshop?
Yeah, great question. So I will bring emotional intelligence into leadership often because I feel like our ability to lead, it's not a technique, it's really our way of being. And so it is emotional intelligence. How are you cultivating trust? How are you cultivating compassion? How are you as a listener? How are you as a communicator? It's all part of leadership. So I will bake emotional intelligence in. And since I worked in corporate, I know how to meet people in that language. But when I'm working on emotional intelligence with spiritual women, we're talking a lot about intuition. So it's really about, can you grow the clairs, clairsentience, clairaudience, all of that, and which one are you strongest in, and how do you take this emotional intelligence back to the world as a mom, as a partner, as a worker. So it's really about this holistic approach to their lives, and it's not just about leadership. So they're a little different and a little nuanced, but can be very similar in many ways. We've done heart math workshops, and heart math is really about certain breathing techniques and different heart center techniques that the horses naturally help us with. And it's all about coherence. So it's all about coming into heart resonance and living more from the heart space, because the heart is a brain, the way our mind and our head has a brain. And then the horses will often talk a lot about the gut brain because they have huge intestines aimed right at the ground, and they live from that gut sense of what feels good. And so we can also cultivate gut awareness and body awareness as well.
I think emotional intelligence in general seems to be missing in a lot of people. And when you talk about cultivating love and cultivating compassion, I know that's going to generate a lot of eye rolls with some people, but other people will get it pretty much right away.
Yep.
Great stuff. Any words of wisdom the horses might pass on to our listeners?
Oh, so good. So good. Let me see. So what I'm getting from them is they're saying there's always an opportunity for us to become more present. As we live in the moment, we cultivate our true nature, and that actually leads to a lot more happiness.
Excellent. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. How can our listeners find you online?
Sure. So my current website is consciousrockstar.com. It's eventually going to go to kateneligan.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Kate Neligan, equine coach as well. I'll be happy to connect.
Excellent. I will put that in the show notes also. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.